It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. To combat negative life events, we need resilience. But what is resilience, and how do we get it? Today's guest, Sally Baker, offers a guide to developing a deeper understanding of how we can successfully emerge from life's inevitable challenges. Sally is a therapist who began her training working with women survivors of sexual abuse and domestic violence. Her new book is The Getting of Resilience from the Inside Out, a practical guide to learning resilience at any age, no matter your upbringing. Welcome, Sally. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Joan.
So, Sally, let's begin the conversation with a definition of resilience. What does it mean to be resilient?
It's an ability to be flexible, to be adaptable, to be able to pivot in the face of challenging circumstances. Very atypically, it's that ability to fall down and pick ourselves back up.
Does resilience come naturally for some people?
I think it's something that is, we learn resilience in an ideal family situation. If we're raised in a family where we're loved, honored, and adored and heard, then we can develop resilience. But for those of us who aren't raised in those circumstances, you can develop resilience as adults.
What determines if we're a resilient person?
Our family structure, our family experience mainly. When we're children, we're really powerless. So it's what happens to us when we're children. So my book begins with my story, which I can just give you a quick recap on, is that something terrible happened to me when I was 7. I told my mother, and she said, never mention it again. And she was really angry with me. And I took it that I'd done something terribly wrong, and it was all my fault. So in those circumstances, that was a pivotal moment in my life that I thought there was something wrong with me. And that kind of depicted how I thought and felt about myself until I was 35 years old, and I had a follow-up conversation on that same theme with my mother. And that kind of answered loads of unanswered questions. But that event had made me feel that I wasn't resilient and that I was a bad person. I was a bad, failed person. And that happens in families all of the time. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but a lot of my clients, bad things happen to them just as bad things happen to me. That's terrible. But also, it's the judgments we make about ourselves when we are those small, powerless individuals that really dictates our level of resilience, how we think and feel about ourselves.
The interesting thing about resilience, Sally, is that you don't think about it until you need it. So, for example, I went through a lot of trauma when I started to do this work. And in a period of 5 months, my 23-year marriage ended. My mother died, my sister died, and my oldest son left for school. And those were my remaining family members. My father and brother had already passed away. And so if you look at what I went through, any one of those things could have derailed a person, any one of them, but I got hit with all of them at once. And I never really understood what resilience meant. I never thought about it. And I always wondered why I was able to get through all of that, create this business, and then move forward, healthy and happy. And what was it about me? What was it about my upbringing? Why was I different than someone else?
Did you find out what it was, Joan, for you?
I don't really know, but when I think about my parents, my brother died when he was 14, right before I was born. And I guess without realizing it, because that's where our programming comes from when we're a child and we don't know we're being programmed, but I guess watching my parents carry on and live and right. I assume they were very resilient people from that. So I guess there was
Yeah.
something in that they taught me that I was unaware of.
They taught you or they showed you, didn't they? Just by their examples of how they loved you. So in my work, I mean, I know there are people, it's a lot of adverse reactions, adverse experiences when you're a child. It impacts the voice in our head, the voice every one of us has that gives a running commentary on everything we say and do. So when you're raised in a family where you're loved, honored, adored, and heard, the voice in your head can be more like a cheerleader, someone sitting on your shoulder saying, doesn't matter if you screw up, you're still a good person. Whereas if you're raised in a much more transactional, judgmental family structure, where you're made to feel that you don't live up to expectations, where you're a disappointment, the voice in your head can be very critical, carping. It can be continually putting yourself down. So that's one of the big differences. And in the book, it tells you how to turn that voice, that judgmental, carping voice in your head, from critical to supportive. That's one of the things that haunts so many of us.
In addition to that, is it also watching the way your parents behave? So, for example, my parents were never a victim. They never had a woe is me attitude. They never felt sorry for themselves. So did I learn that from their behavior?
Absolutely. And the fact that they're solution focused and they look for ways to solve problems and situations makes you adaptable and flexible, as opposed to feeling overwhelmed. It's when we're feeling overwhelmed that we're so powerless. So I'm sure their attitude has a lot to do with your own development of resilience.
So you've worked with sexual and physical abuse survivors. How does someone get past an assault or a major trauma like that?
Well, I went on to have lots of my own sexual abuse and major traumas, and as a lot of therapists have. But I think it's not enough for us to just have skin in the game. I think it's enough for us to live our lives resolved of that trauma, cleared of that trauma, to be happy, to live, to fulfill our full potential. So it's highly possible to overcome trauma. Trauma sits in our reptilian brain, in our monkey brain. It gets trapped in there. You can't consciously talk your way out of trauma. I do work where we go back into the reptilian brain and make the changes there. And then the trauma that was massively overwhelming and dominating their life and how they thought and feel about themselves can be erased, but only when working with the reptilian brain, the subconscious mind.
Well, you just said that we try to talk ourselves out of things. I think that is the approach most of us take.
It's a bit like trying to do your own root canal work. Some of the work you can do yourself. It's great to get a better awareness of what triggers you have, and an understanding of one's past. But the ability just to completely clear trauma on one's own without working with someone who's guiding you. Because often in my work, it's not what clients tell me, it's also what they omit. So, we can have a whole session where they're just talking about their mother, for instance. And I'll say, oh yeah, now tell me about your father. And that can be, it's omission and commission. It's what people tell you, and it's also what they leave out. So sometimes you just need a therapist to point you in the direction of what you might be overlooking, what you might not be addressing. Also, we set up lots of habits that distract us from how we're really thinking and feeling about ourselves. Busy people, or people who are compulsive shoppers or compulsive hoarders, what would they have to address if they weren't relying on those things to occupy all their headspace?
I know in my own life, when I had problems with resilience and getting up from whatever knocked me down, it usually was because of the expectations that I set, the story that I wrote about my life. And whenever something didn't go the way I thought it was supposed to, that would set me up for feeling sorry for myself, to be honest with you. For lack of better description, that's where I was. And I thought everyone else had something better. But it was when I learned to release those expectations and to accept what is, that helped me to become more resilient. Do you think that's a good approach?
That's an ideal approach. And also those patterns that were laid down where you have high expectations of how things are going to go and then get disappointed, that'll be patterning that was put in place a very long time ago. That'll be just something you adopted and without thinking. It's not conscious. Again, it's not conscious. It's not conscious awareness. But yes, I mean, being able to approach life with a positive outlook, not a perfect outlook, because perfection is another trap, but being open to possibilities, and also having a faith and understanding that whatever life throws at you, you'll make the best of it.
And so this is a muscle that we can build upon. We may not be resilient at any particular time, but we can certainly build upon it.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the early casualties of not building resilience as a child is that our intuition is equally weakened. So that's another muscle that you can work on, learning to strengthen your sense of intuition. Your gut response, your hunches often come from your higher good. But when we're children and we're powerless and not in a safe environment, we learn to ignore our intuition. But as adults, we can strengthen our intuition by just checking in with ourselves before we say yes to something, just checking in to see whether this serves us, whether this is something we really want to do.
Well, so many of us go through life on autopilot. We don't even pay attention to our responses, our emotions, our feelings. But like you're saying, all of the way that we react as adults, it's programming from when we're children, and it's not even ours. It comes from the people around us. So becoming mindful of our behavior, that's the first step, isn't it?
Definitely. Having clarity about what drives us, what triggers us, why we're responding in certain ways. I mean, you can see it often in relationship work. So I see it, you know, when one's partner says something that is slightly annoying, like, why have you left your shoes downstairs, or why have you left this out, and your response is really angry. That can be because you get triggered from behaviors that happened decades before. So it's not proportionate. When you find yourself behaving in a disproportionate way to everyday triggers, it's probably old stuff that's getting alerted. It's like picking a scab off. So it means going back and exploring what's happened in the past. Timeline works really good for that.
Can you tell us more about the timeline protocol?
Yes. So the timeline protocol is a neurolinguistic programming modality where you plot a timeline from the moment you were born up to the present day, and on the timeline you plot whatever your challenges are. So for some people it could be their weight, some people it could be their drug use or their alcohol consumption, and we plot, like, we don't have stories from our birth time, but we will have apocryphal family stories. What kind of baby were you? A happy baby, a healthy baby? Were you a sickly baby? All of that kind of stuff. And then on the timeline, we plot key major events: starting school, losses, moving house, new job, bullying at school, or getting engaged, going to higher education, getting married, first child, all of those kind of life events. And then we tag them in comparison to how was your alcohol use then, or how was your hoarding or your compulsive shopping. And there'll be periods of your life where things were much more under control, much calmer, versus period of your life where you felt overwhelmed and resorted to sabotaging behaviors. And the timeline is a way of identifying what the triggers might be for that self-sabotaging behavior. And also it highlights times in your life when you were able to respond in a healthier way. What else did you have going on? Maybe you were running then, or maybe you were singing in a choir. Maybe you were seeing friends more. Maybe you were dancing more. All of those things that worked towards one's mental health that you may have dropped in more recent years, but were actually really good strategies for preserving mental health. So it's just an overview. It's another way of looking at quite abstract information, but in a much more practical, illustrative way.
When you're building out that timeline and you're writing the events, should you also include how you were feeling?
Definitely. Yes. How did it feel when you started school? How did it feel when you were sent away to boarding school? How did you cope and feel when you got married? How did you feel when you had your first child? All of those things. And if they were positive experiences for you, did they correlate to positive behaviors? And if they were negative experiences, like a divorce or a separation or a death, How did you compensate? How did you ameliorate those negative feelings, those difficult, uncomfortable feelings? What did you do? Often people eat those negative feelings down with food, or bury them under alcohol. It's just looking at patterns of behavior. And where, again, back to clarity, when you have the clarity, you can make better decisions.
So when you recognize those patterns and you have a better understanding of the story of your life, what do you do with that information to help build resilience?
You check in with your intuition. You try to avoid knee-jerk responses. You break patterns of behavior that you've done before. I often work with a music box, and in the music box, with the one with a little ballerina, she only plays one tune. She only does one dance. And you can find out from your timeline that when you are triggered by certain negative experiences, that you, again, only do one dance and only play one tune, which might be to self-sabotage with alcohol or food or whatever you're doing. And this is a way of challenging that behavior. What could you do differently?
Is it helpful to visualize a different behavior and outcome at any point? So let's say you were bullied at a particular age and you had a certain response. Is it a beneficial tool to visualize that and create a different response in your imagination with a different outcome? Does that have any benefit to healing?
Visualization, I think, is really powerful. I would visualize them feeling calm and confident in the present. There are techniques when we can go back and we can heal inner child work and rewrite those histories, or take that child out of that very difficult situation, whatever it is. Being bullied at school stays with people for decades. Being bullied at work, has a profound effect on people's mental well-being. So but when they track it back to an earlier time, because often it becomes a pattern of behavior that just replicates throughout their lives, take them back either to the initiatizing event or to a much earlier event. And then with guided visualization, take that child out of that difficult situation and put him or her somewhere very safe, like in a sacred space or deep in one's heart. Then you're no longer presenting that child to current problems. You're presenting your adult self. Mm-hmm. So the inner child work, which is based around visualization, can be immensely useful towards healing past trauma.
Is that effective because the subconscious can't tell the difference between what's real and what is imagined? So you're basically, I don't want to say tricking, but you're giving your subconscious a different scenario.
Yeah, you're giving your consciousness a gift, Joan, of a better outcome. Yes, you're spot on.
If we are unable to do this on our own, is something like hypnotherapy beneficial?
Well, the other word that's been around for a long time for hypnotherapy is suggestion technique. So I'm a hypnotherapist, but I often don't introduce hypnosis till much later in the process of working with someone, because I believe you have to clear the crud first. Clear it, resolve it, erase it, let it go. And then you can use hypnotherapy techniques to overlay positive reinforcement. But it's not enough to just do that in isolation. You have to clear the pain first.
So if someone's listening to you right now and that person is in pain, what is your advice to help that person get started on a healing journey?
Read the book. The book has lots of actionable steps that are very easy to follow, that could make really strong positive changes in how you think and feel about yourself. And one of the lessons of the entire book, and what people who are struggling are often very poor at, is developing self-compassion. Being kind to yourself when you're struggling. Treat yourself like a ninja in training. Get good sleep, get the best nutrition you can have. Cut out alcohol, stop drinking, because it affects your REM sleep. Your ability to process anxiety and depression while you sleep is massively reduced if you're drinking alcohol. So just ways of supporting yourself while you're having a difficult time, and treating yourself with kindness is key to so many of those things.
And once again, the title of that book is The Getting of Resilience from the Inside Out. Sally, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and your work?
Thank you. My website's www.workingonthebody.com. It's all small words, workingonthebody.com, all joined together.
And Sally, in about 30 seconds or less, what is the takeaway? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
You can be fulfilled. You can fulfill your potential. You can live a full and happy life, whatever's happened to you in the past.
Sally, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Joan.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, CYACYL.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read our digital articles, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.